Ostallos Siziba, the National Deputy Spokesperson for Citizens Coalition for Change, and Commissioner Obert Gutu, National Peace and Reconciliation Commission spokesperson. And we will be going live on Facebook as well in that conversation. We will have the news at 7 and we'll get into the exchange as we continue to talk about topical issues. This time, education and the model that we use. And as at JC and certain even grade 7 exams, you know, the Nziramasanga Commission held that we should scrap some of these things as part of wider reforms to overhaul the country's education system. So how do we compare us now and Vaganyola ZJC? Are we still at the same place? Are we still at the same level? Does this proposal make sense? Are grade 7, O-level and A-level exams really making a difference? And we want to hear from you on this. We'll then go into the very last hour on a Wednesday. As we continue, we'll extend the conversation and talk a little more about education. I know that you have a lot to say in that regard. That's what you can look forward to on tonight's edition of The Deep Dive. Now we're getting straight into that sponsored program. We're starting things off with a very, very, very aptly titled song that speaks to what we're talking about. That's all right, okay. That we will get into in just a moment. So do stay tuned as we get straight into that program, proudly sponsored by the CCDN.
100.4 FM. Harare's Heartbeat. Every girl I want to me song like cocoa. Allow me day one fine. 100.4 FM. Harare's Heartbeat.
Deep Dive.
This program is sponsored and made possible by the CCDN. That's the Chitungwiza. That is the Chitungwiza Community Development Network, and they are a youth servicing community-based organization that was formed in 2010, and the organization is duly registered with the Zimbabwe Youth Council. Its mission is to promote the active and meaningful participation of young people in solving the prevailing developmental challenges affecting them, and their vision is to see and to build a community where human rights and fundamental freedoms are enjoyed by all. Joining me in this conversation is Tafadzwa Mugwadi. He is the Zanu PF Director of Information and Publicity. Mr. Mugwadi, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Mugwadi, good evening. Or perhaps he will try and connect with him. We're also joined by Ostallos Siziba, National Deputy Spokesperson for the Citizens Coalition for Change. Mr. Siziba, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. And good evening to listeners and Zimbabwe.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We are also joined by Commissioner Obert Gutu, National Peace and Reconciliation Commission spokesperson. Commissioner Gutu, good evening.
Good evening, Rumbi. Good evening, listeners. Good evening to my co-panelists. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic to have you along. Mr. Mugwadi, are you now online? Or we are still just trying to connect with Mr. Mugwadi, but we will get the conversation started. Perhaps let me start with you, Commissioner Gutu. In terms of, the position of the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission on political violence and on the youth who engage in political violence.
Our position is very clear, as you know, in terms of Section 252 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, which is the supreme law of the land. We are constitutionally mandated to deal with all issues pertaining to peace building. In fact, we are actually a peace building. Independent constitutional commission, and as the constitutionally mandated peace-building mechanism of our beloved country, Zimbabwe, we are there to ensure that we cultivate a culture of peace and peacefulness today, tomorrow, and forever. That's why we actually have as one of our mantras or one of our mission statement as building a peaceful Zimbabwe for all generations. So as the NPRC, Our mandate is very clear. We are there to ensure that there is peace throughout the country, that even during or even outside the electioneering period, Zimbabwe should continue to enjoy peace, because we all know that without peace, we can forget about socio-economic development. Without peace, we can also forget about political stability.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Gutu. I believe that we are joined now by Mr. Tafadzwa Mugwadi, Zanu PF Director of Information and Publicity. Good evening, Mr. Mugwadi, and thank you for joining us in this conversation.
My pleasure, and good evening to your listeners.
We're so happy to have you on board, and so I'll engage you in terms of establishing, the position of Zanu PF on the youth who engage in political violence.
In fact, I think our message has been very consistent. It is a message that comes from the top. The President and First Secretary of the Revolutionary Party, to which I belong, Zanu PF, and other millions of people belong, has been very categorical, very loud and clear on the need for peaceful engagement ahead of this year's general harmonized election. And our President's perspective of peace, Comrade Edim Nangagwa, is not about peace for political purposes alone. It is also about peace as a continuous character of our society for social, economic, and political development. That is why President Nangagwa has been very clear that we should shun all manner of violence as a means of galvanizing support for our political parties. After all, we pride ourselves in being the party that fought for this country. And one of the key reasons for that fight, which was the liberation struggle, was to ensure that we coexist as a people peacefully, tolerating each other, notwithstanding the diversity of our views. If anything, we should actually celebrate that diversity. A person does not cease to become a Zimbabwean because they hold contrary views to mine. That is not how our society should be. And that is why President Nangagwa has been very consistent to say never involve violence as a means of political mobilization. If you so do, you are only doing it for yourself and your family, and not in the name of. And that is why our message is very clear. We should shun political violence. What Gokwe, just a couple of days ago, is very regrettable. And we would want to make it very clear to those who are responsible for that violence in the Triple C to stop that violence and to begin to be civil and understand that politics is just about a contestation of ideas about how best to take our country forward, not an arena of using noble carries against those that hold views different from them.
Thank you, Mr. Mugwadi. I want to bring, Mr. Siziba into this. Comrade Ostallos, what's the position of the Triple C on youth who engage in political violence?
Thank you very much. I think that we have made ourselves very clear as Triple C that we think that we must relegate out of our politics the culture of violence, particularly the use of young people intoxicated by leaders at the top to be able to be instruments of terror, particularly to those that hold different views. You have seen how our politics has been made toxic, has been made unattractive to different, players because of the toxicity of violence, not just the physical violence, but the violence in language, the issue of name calling, the issue of being violent in terms of words, castigating, and all those sorts of toxicity that has poisoned our politics as a country. We believe that politics is about superior logic. Let those superior ideas be given a platform to lead and be able to govern, because it's always policies are born out of alternative ideas. We think that it is the time, particularly given that Zimbabwe is a constitutional democracy. What we need to resolve the issue of youth violence is obviously making sure that we enhance the culture of tolerance, that we deal with questions of impunity, because we've had decades of people who have been in the forefront of inciting and implementing violence against those who differ, and there is nothing that happens to them. So this is the issue that we think must be dealt with. We think that law obviously must apply, without fear or favor to anyone who incites, to anyone who's involved in issues of political violence. This is important because it gives credibility to our elections. It gives credibility to the processes that we do as a country, because when we are free from violence, it means that we're able to produce a credible and legitimate leadership of the country. Once we do that, we know that there is limited contestation of what happens after an election, because these pre-election violent issues have a bearing on the credibility and outcome of the election.
Now, I want to come to the role that political leaders play in ending political violence in the youth. Perhaps coming back to you, Mr. Mugwadi, what's the role that political leaders play in ultimately ending all incidents of political violence?
In fact, it is the political leaders that are looking and seeking for support of the people and the people's mandate to govern. That is very clear. It is therefore political leaders of political organizations who go to the people's homes and societies and communities to galvanize support for their political activities. There is no question or mistake about that. But then, the message that those politicians or political leaders or political parties carry is one that is fundamental and very important in getting rid of violence from our society. That is why I continue to repeat, and I so repeat because it is very important for me to do so. When President Mnangagwa, when all Zanu PF leaders make themselves very clear about violence, it is because they take responsibility that their message of development and about promises of what they seek to do, when given the mandate to govern, when that mandate is renewed this year, we seek to govern through this way towards the Vision 2030. But for us to be capable of doing that, let us shun violence. So the message of the political leader, especially the presidential candidate, is very important. That is why when President Mnangagwa tells people to stop violence, what is very shocking is that that message is not reciprocated from other political players in other political parties. Other political leaders started campaigning by charging their supporters and stopping violence. That is why, which leaders have been going about telling people and those who care to know that if we lose, if we lose, we are going to make this country ungovernable. Such messages have come from other politicians, and they do so to mobilize their supporters to prepare for violent situations, which is very bad. The events that were held on 1 August 2018, barely 24 hours after the voting process had completed, were regrettable and should not visit our society again. Elections are just but a season that passes. That season should not be one that should be taken advantage of to look at your brother or a sister from the next door or another Zimbabwean as a lesser Zimbabwean because they wear a different political jacket from ours. That is the message that President Mnangagwa tells us. The second thing, which I would also want to recommend, is that leaders of civil society organizations, these civil society organizations, they must also begin to take responsibilities about the activities, the kind of activities that they organize. What we have come to see quite so recently are civil society organizations being implicated, in some instances actually being the mobilizers and organizers of such violence. The violence that took place under the instigation of Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition on 14 to 19 January 2019, which left Harare in tatters. That was an NGO, that was a TSO being at the forefront of doing that. That should not be celebrated. That should be discouraged. And such civil society organizations must be designated as rogue organizations that should not have any place to operate in our society. At the end of the day, even those in the opposition, if they win, let me assume the unthinkable. If they win, they will seek, they will also want to govern in a peaceful environment. But why do they create an unpeaceful environment for ZANU-PF victory? When ZANU-PF was won, why should that be a cause for violence? But when we are mobilizing, when we are all over from Zambezi to Limpopo, clinically and methodically engaging our party structures at grassroots level to the top, to strategize for victory, peacefully, they will be sleeping in air-conditioned hotels, engaging in the best lunch and best supper. But when we win, they start throwing stones. That's very bad. It is important that when we are going to elections, dear listeners, accepting electoral results is a fundamental aspect of a democratic election. You can't reject the election results always. And when you so do, you start mobilizing violence or agitating for violence. That should have no place in our society.
Mr. Siziba, I want you to come in there. The role of political leaders in ending political violence, in your response.
Thank you very much. We submitted and continue to say that we want elections in the receiving end of coordinated sponsored violence against our members. You know of the regrettable incident in Nyasime where one of our members was brutally murdered in cold blood. And the crime was that you hold different view. You know of the incident recently that happened in Murewa where members of our movement were harassed, beaten and tortured, the elderly for that matter, for holding a public meeting of, in a private meeting of CCC. So what this tells you is that we are going into an election without democracy, where holding a different view becomes criminal, particularly on the fact that people were beaten, that you should not be, wearing yellow, you should not be participating in CCC. We have also seen what happened when we had our public meeting, a rally in Kwekwe, where, militias came with machetes, disrupting a meeting that was cleared by the police during an election campaign. And when one of the Zimbabwe's presidential candidates was there, in that case, our president, Advocate Nelson Chamisa. So for us, those particular incidents that leaves a scourge and pain within the Zimbabwe's body politics are issues of worry. We think that this is born out of reckless statements that come out of political leaders. One of it is the excitement that the opposition people are alive and they must be crushed. Very regrettable, because we don't expect that from someone who's holding a higher office in the country, because we think that the first duty of political leaders is to preach peace and tolerance, that we are Zimbabweans first before we belong to different political parties. We're constitutional democracy. We are allowed to have the freedom to have different views. All these are healthy debates. These are healthy discourses and healthy submissions to make our country better. That's why the Constitution provides for those particular rights and freedoms. But when you see people pouncing, we had our rural tours blog, members manning roadblocks. So for us, the first responsibility is pronunciation by political leaders across the political divide that we have no tolerance of violence, because supporters follow the dictates and character of a leader. So when you see those holding leadership positions being in the forefront of inciting violence, we have a problem. So the first duty is the message of peace. Number two is the issue of dealing with impunity, because when you see, just recently there was a video which was circulating on social media, one of the ministers, Minister Garwe, inciting public violence, threatening the unleashing of violence for those that differ, threatening the use of the armed forces against those that hold different views from those of the liberation narrative. We think that all these things is because of issues of impunity. How do you have someone having those things being said in a public meeting, in a political party meeting, and nothing happens to them? We think that the political leaders, particularly those with the responsibility to make sure that the law takes its course. We deal with issues of impunity. Number 3, we obviously think that the issue that is around the role of political leaders and political parties is to be able to preach inter-party tolerance. When we do our public meetings, what we seek is to lay bare. Our vision is to lay bare how we intend to transform the lives of ordinary people. That is not criminal. That is not, threatening anyone's peace. So we think that activists on the ground must be able to understand that Party A can be able to gather in that venue and Party B gather in that venue without disrupting each other, without killing each other, because we believe that no one must lose their life on account of politics. No one must lose their life because they hold a different view. Because we are Zimbabweans, we belong together. Yes, we have differences. People support different teams in soccer. There is no need for people to die because of voting those different, support belief systems. So that is our view as Triple C, that political party leaders must preach the message, must practice the message, must also make sure that those that do the groundwork have that particular understanding, because when we have internal meetings, that's when we have to make our people understand that we have different views with different political parties, and let's do our work on the ground. Let those that are supported by be given responsibility to lead. So it starts with making sure that we campaign freely, because it's not criminal.
I can't hear anything.
Just hang on there, Mr. Siziba. Apologies, we seem to be getting some nasty feedback on our lines there. I think that's a little bit better. Coming in there, perhaps taking it up there, Commissioner Gutu, I hope you're still on the line.
Yes, I'm still on the line, although I could not hear anything from my co-panelists. I couldn't hear anything from Tafadzwa. I couldn't hear anything from Gift. I'm sure maybe there are technical challenges. I could not hear anything.
My apologies, but I suppose in forging ahead, there's an instance that arises where Tafadzwa makes some statements about election or pre-election violence. Gift makes the same statements, and then the question now is, how does the Commission intervene when there are cases of political violence that have been alleged or that have been put forward by either one party or the other? What does the NPRC do there?
Yeah, in fact, like I've already said, we are mandated to be peace builders. So what we do is, as I'm speaking right now, we actually have what we call peace committees at a provincial level. All the country's 10 provinces have got what we call provincial peace committees. And these peace committees are constituted by amongst other constituents. They are made up of representatives from political parties, from Zanu PF, from Triple C, from MDC, and other political parties. They are also made up of representatives from civil society. They are also made up of representatives from faith-based organizations. They are also made up of representatives from women groups, from youth groups. They are also made up of representatives from the media, like yourselves. They are also made up of representatives from labor, representatives from employers, and representatives from the academia. In fact, every province has no less than 40 members in a provincial peace committee. And as I'm talking right now, we are actually having our provincial peace committees being activated throughout the 10 provinces. We've got our teams that are out there in Bulawayo Metropolitan. Our teams are out there in Matabele North Province, in Matabele South Province, in the Midlands, in Mashingo, in Mashonaland East, in Mashonaland Central. In fact, throughout the length and breadth of Zimbabwe, from the Zambezi to the Limpopo, we are having our teams. So what we do is we engage stakeholders. We encourage that political parties, especially their leaders, their supporters, and their sympathizers, should appreciate that at the end of the day, politics is about politics. Politics is not a war. Politics is not about beating up each other. Politics is not about shouting at each other using abusive, vulgar, and insulting language. Politics is about campaigning peacefully. So we are saying, if we are going to have an election that is peaceful. The primary movers of that peaceful atmosphere really are the politicians, the political parties and their supporters. We are, as the NPRC, calling out there, sending a very, very brotherly, sisterly and patriotic call to all Zimbabweans to say, if you are campaigning in peace, be tolerant. If you are messaging, be it messaging at a rally, on social media, on television, on radio, or using whatever method of mass communication that you are using, you should ensure that you respect the rights of other people. You don't abuse other people. You don't provoke other people by using language or even slogans that are inflammatory, slogans that promote violence, especially among the youth, because you find that youth, unfortunately, they become the most vulnerable group of people when it comes to issues of political violence, because most of them, unfortunately, they are prone to being used and manipulated by unscrupulous politicians. So at the end of the day, I think it's actually very important that political leaders across the political divide, at whatever level, from top to bottom and bottom to top, should appreciate that when they are campaigning, peace really should be at the very center, should be at the very core of their political campaign. Peace should be at the very core of their political messaging.
And just taking it a little bit further, Commissioner Gutu, does the Commission have powers to arrest political violence perpetrators or anyone fingered in actually committing any acts of political violence?
No, we don't have those powers. Let me just quickly point out for the benefit of listeners that the Commission is a constitutional body, so we are guided by the Supreme Law of the land. We are also guided by the Enabling Act of Parliament, which is the National Peace and Reconciliation Act that was promulgated in February 2018. We also have a statutory instrument, 90 of 2018. So those are the three, what I might call, pieces of legislation or legal instruments, if I may call them that give us our mandate. Our mandate is we receive complaints, we investigate, and we try to conciliate. But if there are acts that are of a criminal nature, like if somebody beats up somebody or kills somebody or does anything that is within the realm of criminal law, then we refer that matter to the police so that it will be handled in terms of the country's criminal justice system.
If you're just joining us, thank you so much. This is a program proudly sponsored by the Chitungwiza Community Development Network, CCDN, and we are engaging in a very, very topical discussion around ending political violence in the youth. Chitungwiza Community Development Network is a youth servicing organization that was formed in August 2010, and the organization is duly registered with the Zimbabwe Youth Council, promoting participation of young people in solving prevailing developmental challenges affecting them, with a vision to see a community where human rights and fundamental freedoms are enjoyed by all. My guests in this discussion are Tafadzwa Mugwadi, Zanu PF Director of Information and Publicity, Gift Ostallos Siziba, National Deputy Spokesperson and Citizens Coalition for Change, and Commissioner Obert Gutu, who is representing National Peace and Reconciliation Commission and is the NPRC spokesperson. Now, as we get deeper into this conversation, I want to come back to you, Tafadzwa, to Mr. Mugwadi there. How best then can an attitude and a culture of national peace, unity and tolerance, among young people as we get towards the election be engendered? How can that be fostered effectively?
Well, the starting point is that we had a man and a person lying at the National Shrine, Comrade Day. John Landangomo, the late Vice President and Second Secretary of our party, and of course the Vice President of the Republic. He was very clear that peace begins with you, it begins with me, it begins with us all. The responsibility to ensure that there is peace, harmony, and tranquility is a duty of every Zimbabwean, every patriotic Zimbabwean. It is a duty of every politician. It is a duty of every young person. The security of the people of Zimbabwe is paramount, notwithstanding whether we are having elections or not. The church must continue to play its role. it must continue to play its role. Because almost, if you look at the demographic distribution in this country, the majority of Zimbabweans belong to Christ. They go to church. It is therefore duty of the church to preach peace, coexistence, tolerance, and harmony at every gathering, at every level, rather than giving out and dishing out the gospel that is about violence. You know very well that we have also had some churches, some very much churches indeed, that have been at the forefront of driving violence. That should have no place in our society. The second aspect is that when you go and mobilize, it is paramount that the message is taken to the young people that at the end of the day, they also need to vote in peace. They also need to enjoy peace after election. Like I said earlier, President Mnangagwa and Zanu-PF's perspective of peace is not one that is mirrored around election times alone. It is not one that seeks to have national peace simply because we are going for election. It should be a national, consistent attitude of every Zimbabwean, knowing fully well that if you don't like to be injured yourself, the next person close to you doesn't also want to be injured for their own views. Those going about sponsoring violence must stop it. This is not my message. It is the message of the president. The civil society organization must desist from fronting politics of violence. They must desist from charging their membership to engage in violence in favor of a certain political organization. That should have no place in our society. The media must also begin to interrogate the conscience of politicians as they go about the campaigning. We in ZANU-PF are not afraid to be interrogated. We are not afraid to be spotlighted. But the same must also apply to the opposition in terms of their message. The electoral laws in this country are very clear on the conduct of political parties and political leaders when it comes to campaign. There are certain things that they should not do. And the recent amendment is very clear that any political leader who would have engaged in violence or mobilized violence will have not his name on our ballot paper. That is a strong deterrence measure which should be supported by the conduct of all political parties. Youth leagues in both political parties must amplify this message to ensure that the focus of all young people should be development. It should be farming. It should be mining. It should be retailing. It should be manufacturing. It should be production, and not violence, because nothing comes out of violence. I've never seen anywhere someone reaping fruit of violence. If you have seen anyone, tell me.
Mr. Mugwadi, let me come in there. I want Mr. Siziba to come in and effectively, I think, engage us on that very same question. How best can that attitude of national peace, unity, and tolerance be engendered among the young people as we gear towards the general election and beyond?
Thank you very much. I think, like I said, the young people are the major demographic group that is affected by violence, particularly in terms of, inter-party violence that happens in different, political gatherings. We have suggested and continue to say that one of the most important things that must happen is that the police must act in a manner that is professional in apprehending suspects across the political divide that are involved in violence. We think that the police have got the duty and responsibility to act and behave in a manner that is professional, in a manner that protects victims of political violence, and making sure that it prosecutes perpetrators of political violence. Because what we have seen many times is the turning of victims into perpetrators, where victims of political violence end up being the ones targeted. So we think that is the first issue. Number two, I'm glad that the NPRC sends its representative to this important program, because the NPRC plays an important role also in dealing with issues of impunity and issues of politically motivated violence, because as political parties and political players, we engage these institutions on issues of political violence with the intention to have redress, because it works hand in hand with the law enforcement agencies, so that victims or perpetrators of political violence are well known, documented, and of course taken to the law. That is the second issue. Number three, we think that in terms of making sure that young people don't get themselves involved in political violence, is the issue of making sure that there are no political leaders that incite this particular demographic group, that such and such individuals are not supposed to gather here, they're supposed to be killed, or they're supposed to. You saw the video that circulated where someone is inciting violence and even threatening death. So the issue of impunity that I said, the first thing is important, because when people are named and shamed, prosecution must be able to follow, so that we address these issues of perpetual and vicious cycles of political violence. Lastly, we think that, and we submit that, one of the most important issues that must happen is increasing the cost of political violence, because when people do it and nothing happens to them, and there is lukewarm approach in terms of persecution to those that are involved in violence, it further perpetuates this culture of political violence among us, particularly young people as the drivers of this particular violence. So we think that we must have to make sure that we tighten the law in terms of dealing with people that execute violence, because we have seen that we have lost lives on account of politics. You know that we lost one of our members, Mboneni Ngube, in Kwekwe, because of political violence. And the question really of the families is going to be in and around what happened to the perpetrators. And other issues, obviously, dealing with also questions of, past injustices, so that when these issues are addressed, and the Commission plays a critical role in fostering those important conversations with victims of past, political violence, so that people can be able to see that this is what was done, so that there's closure, so that there's tolerance, so that we can come together as Zimbabweans and present our differing opinions without killing each other.
And now we turn to the question of patriotism. The President of the Second Republic, President Mnangagwa, once highlighted the issue of growing patriotism in relation to attending of opposition parties, say, for example, at national events, and the context largely of our political terrain, and also talking about political maturity expressing itself in that way. So I want to come to you, Mr. Mugwadi, in that respect, as we are wrapping up. Do you see political parties in this country willing to uphold that sort of concept of patriotism? Mr. Mugwadi, are you still there? Whilst we reconnect with Mr. Mugwadi, perhaps Mr. Oh yes, there you are. Just asking there in terms of that issue there, the political maturity and patriotism in the context of seeing opposition parties attending national events and this demonstrating a political maturity. Is this concept of patriotism something that political parties in this country are willing to uphold? Once we connect with Mr. Mugwadi, perhaps Ostallos, you can come in there on that one as we wrap up.
No, thank you very much. We have made it very clear that we are patriotic citizens, and in fact, for us to join the democratic struggles and the democratic changes was pushed by the patriotic necessity to see our country progress. We think that we have also emphasized that message wherever we've attended state events like Heroes Day and so forth, to show a political gesture as an alternative that, look, we have had our differences with political parties, But we have made it very clear that we are not in contest with the state because we want to occupy the state. And it's obviously part and parcel of our credentials is the patriotic duty and the understanding that we are Zimbabweans and we intend to govern this country with the objective to make Zimbabweans live a better life. Because the most patriotic duty that we can ever give Zimbabweans as a political leadership collective is to make sure that we change their lives. That is the most important thing. We can reduce the issues of poverty, reduce unemployment, make sure that we provide medicine in hospitals, make sure that we provide hospitals with the necessary machinery and the necessary equipment so that our people can get primary health care. The most patriotic gift we can give to Zimbabweans as a leadership collective is to make sure that we resolve the crisis of energy in our country, give electricity to our people, provide and urbanize rural areas, construct roads, construct dams, and make sure that our people live a better life. So for us, that is the most important patriotic duty that leaders have to demonstrate to the people so that young people can wake up and get jobs rather than to wake up at the blessing of an empty stomach and a jobless existence. We think that the most patriotic duty is to give teachers a salary above poverty line, to give working class, the bureaucrats in this country, a salary that is able to help them to live. That is a salary above PDL. For us, the patriotic duty is to make sure that we give freedom to our people so that people can live freely, researchers, students can live freely in a democratic country. So that is our affirmation of our patriotic necessity and patriotic obligation to the flag of this country.
Thank you so much, Mr. Siziba. Mr. Mugwadi, I hope we do have you on there. The very last question before I ask you all to wrap up and give me your parting shots. Appreciating the concept of political maturity, opposition parties attending national events. Are we there yet in terms of that aspect of political maturity as a nation?
Well, the epitome of political maturity is President Emerson Mnangagwa. It is the leadership that we offer to the people of Zimbabwe. It's empty. And we would have wished if that maturity could be reciprocated from the conduct of the opposition in all its various forms and manifestations. It is the same maturity that we expect even those around us, those that will be coming to observe our elections, to also demonstrate that maturity and abandon these black operations, typical black operations like what have been given by the Brenda Foundation, which is funded by people like Obasanjo, and make. How does a person, how would an organization like that, led by people like Tendai, claim to have done a research that the MDC or a Triple C is going to win elections or can win elections today? It's no different from ZANU-PF's Commissariat Department saying it has also carried a similar research. The probability of bias in that situation is very actual. But those so-called researchers which do not qualify for real research are done as black operations aimed at charging people and setting the agenda for the elections in Zimbabwe. Such observer missions must not have any place in our society like Brenda Foundation because they are politically aligned. What we would want from those coming to observe elections in our country are people who are genuine, want to see Zimbabwe prosper, see Zimbabweans making their choice and expressing themselves through the ballot, and the will of the people prevailing and being accepted by all and sundry, not those that come through the back door to do the bidding for opposing political parties.
Mr. Mugwadi, I must come in there.
From politicians, observers, the church, the media, all of them must demonstrate maturity.
Well, I must come in there, and unfortunately we fast run out of time in this conversation. But before I bid you all good evening, allow me perhaps to start with you, Commissioner Gutu. In short, your parting shot.
My parting shot on behalf of the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission is, as Tafadzwa has already indicated, that's our mantra, which I would like really, I'll be happy if every Zimbabwean could take this to his or her heart each and every day of their lives. Peace begins with me, peace begins with you, peace begins with all of us. If we could just observe that mantra, credited to the legendary nationalist John Landangomo, then our lives will be made easy, and the peace will become an integral component of our DNA. Peace begins with me, peace begins with you, peace begins with all of us. Good evening, Zimbabwe.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Gutu. Mr. Mugwadi, your parting shot before we bid you good evening. Mr. Siziba, are you still there?
Thank you very much.
Your parting shot very quickly.
I would like to urge Zimbabweans to register to vote and be ready for a democratic breakthrough led by Advocate Nelson Chamisa. Thank you for having us. We urge Zimbabweans to be peaceful in their conduct. We are one people. Let us register to vote. Young people, wherever you are, have your ID, go to the nearest registration center, register to vote and vote for change, vote for transformation. I thank you.
Thank you so much to the gentleman who formed part of my panel, Mr. Mugwadi. Unfortunately, we've lost him there. But thanks go to Mr. Tafadzwa Zanu PF, Director of Information and Publicity. Thanks also go to Mr. Gift Ostallos Siziba, National Deputy Spokesperson for the CCC Citizens Coalition for Change, and to Commissioner Obert Gutu, who is the Commission spokesperson for the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, ending election violence among the youth. A very strong message there. Peace begins with me, begins with you. This program was proudly sponsored by the Chitungwiza Community Development Network, the CCDN, a youth servicing organization that is duly registered with the Zimbabwe Youth Council. This has been a very engaging program on this special edition of The Exchange on Capital 100.4 FM. The time is 7 o'clock. It's time for the news.